my own observation has been, as far as the spiritual journey, there's been a root cause behind our quest for awakening. Some of you might have already read Awakening You, and if you haven't, I really recommend you do, because in that book, that was the last book I wrote, I really explore the 6 root causes of conflict and how we are all experiencing that. Every single human on the planet experiences that. And when we understand the root cause of our conflicts, it makes sense then what motivates us spiritually and what the sponsoring beliefs are behind our quest for awakening. And so this then is reflected on what we've been attracted to and the primary methodology, so to speak, that we've taken on. I guess in general terms, largely speaking, we've borrowed a lot from the Eastern tradition. So we've come out of religion, perhaps, where everything was externalized. The sense of power and divinity was somewhere else, and it was seated very much in a reward and punishment system of being able to somehow find salvation. And so a lot of spiritual seekers have come out of that, left that behind, and have then adopted this flip, this turn back around to recognize the divinity within ourselves. And I guess, largely speaking, spirituality is about that. It's about reconnecting to and reestablishing that root of divinity within ourselves, and to recognize that in everything. The interesting dynamic around this, however, is that it's still being sponsored by disconnection. And that disconnection has given rise to all of our suffering, our belief in separation, and therefore our behaviors that come out of that, of control, possession, divisiveness in all its forms, and a great amount of fear. So there's this huge sense of grief and lack. And so the primary focus has been on ourself, to reclaim the so-called true self. So we've gone through these different ages and stages of how we seek enlightenment, different ages of enlightenment as well, apparently. And, we've gone through philosophical ages, we've gone through cultural ages, and we've entered very much the age of technology and science, which silos everything. It breaks everything down to explore it. It breaks it into its parts. So spirituality has been saying to us, no. We need to find something more holistic. But again, if we really look at it, largely speaking, the approach has been about ourselves. It's been, okay, well, instead of just body, well, no, I'm not just a body. I'm also spirit. I'm also my thoughts. I'm also my emotions. So mind, body, spirit was the whole idea of holistic healing or awakening. And what I'm proposing is that it's still very siloed. It's still very narrow. Why do I propose this? Where does that come from? In my own journey, and some of you are aware of that, maybe you've read Put on the Dance Floor, which, by the way, is still a quite an edited down version of my life and my journey. And there's a lot of things that weren't disclosed in the book that I expand on as I share with you all in different programs. So one of the dominant things occurring in my life was, for me, my own version of disconnection was the amount of conflict and trauma in the family meant there was a big disconnection at the human level. And so I felt incredibly alienated, misunderstood, but I had a profound connection consciously. So I was awake to everything. I could see, feel, sense, experience everything vibrationally, everything in terms of consciousness. I could feel and know and understand what others were experiencing, etc. But at the physically lived level, my life was one of a great amount of violation and abuse in my formative years. And so my salvation throughout my early life was in nature. It was where I was able to have my strongest connection. And so as I look back, I can really see this trail of energetic connections that I had that other people around me didn't have, because I was so deeply connected to nature and to the spiritual realms. I was being guided by the trees around me, the creatures around me, etc., and guided by my ancestors. So I was really experiencing life in a very different way than a lot of people. And that's not to say you all didn't have degrees of that. Some of you were really drawn to nature and had your own version of experiences of that. So what I came to see through that experience was, rather than removing myself from the world as a process for awakening, it was being absolutely connected with the natural world that was really the foundation of my awake consciousness. It's one thing to come in being awake and aware of the transcendent realm. It's another to be grounded with that as an embodied experience. And there's a huge gap oftentimes for people between those two. And so what I really understand now, especially as I have deep connection with my cultural background, being First Nation, Indigenous Australian, what I really understand is that the motivating quest for awakening doesn't really come so much from the disconnect from our true self. It comes through the disconnect with life itself, with creation. Why do I say that? If we look back to all Indigenous cultures, and I just happen to speak about my own heritage and ancestry. I have been initiated. I have been learning with my elders, uncles and aunties for, well, I've been learning all my life. So as I look back through Indigenous culture, what I see is, as Indigenous living, we were so connected with earth, with life, with creation, that we had a natural cohesion of sacred awareness. And so we were deeply connected with earth, with ourselves, with each other, with all living creatures, with the cosmos. And in that, there was a great awakefulness. There was an alignment with the natural laws, the natural order of life. And somewhere along the line, a little human or humans got it into their mind that they were somehow more clever than the natural laws, and decided to control the natural laws. And as a consequence, the ego rose up and the mindset became focused on the singular me. And along with that came control, hierarchy, and possession. And along with possession came dispossession and disconnection from nature and the natural laws. And along with that came great grief, loss, lack, and a loss of awareness, understanding, not just a loss of connection, a loss of knowledge, a loss of love, a loss of sacredness. We lost a lot. It just so happens that for people like myself of Aboriginal heritage, that disconnect is much more recent. And so it's very raw, it's very fresh, whereas many, many people, races and cultures, that disconnect happened so far back that it's really buried in the recesses of the unconscious. And so you all, you know, we all, the modern human doesn't even know where this grief has come from, why we live with grief, why we live with a feeling that something is missing, why we struggle to comprehend ourselves and life, why we struggle to be content or to be at peace or to believe in ourselves and to believe in each other. And so the primary approach to awakening has been to reclaim the so-called true self, to come back into ourself, into consciousness. And yet, in many ways, it's actually a path of escapism and dissociation. It continues to sponsor the notion that there's something wrong with the embodied and lived experience, that somehow we have to transcend or ascend into some other vibrational realm to be awake or to transform this world. And that singular approach means, in a lot of ways, it's like we're in this little bubble. And it's very much about me. Me, me, me. My quest to be awake, my quest to be a better human, my quest to find freedom, greater peace, greater love, greater truth, etc. And so what I'm proposing by sharing with you the 4 sacred pillars is that we flip that on its head, literally flip it on its head, and let's look back to those foundational principles that come from our ancestry. And like, we're all Indigenous. If you dig back deep enough, far enough, you are connected to people who lived at one with nature and in accord with the natural laws. So rather than putting our focus onto self first, let's for a moment imagine what would happen if we restored our connection with nature, with life, with creation itself. If we knew that we are born of earth, that's not just a nice story. It's not just some historical story. It is the truth of us here now. What if we were to feel and experience this connection so deeply that we could restore this connection? If we know ourselves as being connected to and a part of all of life, what happens then is a natural emergence of things in perspective again. Because when we're connected with nature, we're connected with everything around us. it's no longer, oh, I have to get rid of something, or I have to get over my conditioned ideas to realize my oneness. It's actually a direct encounter of the interconnectivity of everything. And that lets us rest into ourself. The reason we don't rest into ourself is because we're afraid. We're not connected with life and the world around us. And so something's always on edge. And of course, consequently, if we don't have all of those connections, we just cannot really comprehend the greater laws of creation. We might hear about them. We might be able to, just rhetorically rattle off various truths, but do we know it? Do we experience it directly or not? And so in this course, I would really love to take you on that journey of flipping everything and establishing a connection in a different order. And that's not to say it's literally everything has to always be in a different order. It's simply saying that when we do follow a sequence of steps, shifts occur easily and naturally themselves. So it's a bit like lighting a fire. If you bring a heavy, wet log to the ground, you might have the spark, you might have the intention, but it's going to be pretty hard to get that damp log alight. And so this is what it's about, is understanding that if we have things in a certain order, we build on our experience more easily. So if we bring the little kindling first, and then we put on a few more sticks, and we build that up, and we let that old log dry out before we put it on, and then we spark it, before we know it, we've got a blazing fire. So the 4 sacred pillars is a map, in a way. It supports us in understanding these 4 primary elements of life that are fundamental to the experience of connectivity, of awakefulness, and holistic awakening. So rather than just body, mind, spirit, I'm proposing that actually holistic awakening needs to encompass existence itself. In some ways, to the mind, that can sound overwhelming, as if, oh, but that's too much. When in truth, if we are able to understand even the basics of this map, and we just work with the basics of this map, as I said before, naturally we find ourselves directly having a more connected experience. We have a more holistic experience of awakening. We find that becomes more integrated naturally as a consequence of addressing all of these primary elements of our life and incorporating them in our picture, in our vision, or how we approach our journey of awakening. So the 4 sacred pillars become a navigation tool for us. If we keep ourselves in check with each of these pillars, then we keep ourselves in greater balance. So what are they? We start with nature, earth, our connection with earth. From there, we move into the recognition of kinship of all living things. Thanks, Emily. I think she's going to share a screen. From there, we move into self, and the spirit, the soul, and source. And from that, we then are able to understand or incorporate the cosmos, the universe, and all of its laws. And all of this revolves around one central tenet, and that is that everything is interconnected and interdependent. Thank you, Emily. So we'll contemplate that first tenet before I go into everything else. Would you all agree that you've already understood somewhere along the line, yes, everything is interconnected, everything is one? Let's have a little hand and like little waves. Yes. Okay, we all agree on this. Awesome. Do you feel and experience this? Be honest with yourself. When do you feel that truth most? And when do you feel you've lost that truth? That's something for you to contemplate. And after this session too, is to really contemplate this. Why? As I shared before, that the greatest motivation for me in bringing these teachings to you is in observation of our spiritual path and our quest for awakening, that it has been primarily centered on me, the self, the individual. When we know the truth is everything is interconnected. So why have we isolated that experience to the me? And we think, oh, but I'm not doing that because, oh, I'm going into consciousness, and oh, consciousness is the source of everything, and so, oh, everything is here. We can think that, but it's still incredibly abstract. And we can have a transcendent experience of that, but it lacks integration. It lacks grounding. So inadvertently, without meaning to, our spiritual path in a lot of ways is keeping us trapped in a more separate experience. Everything is interconnected and interdependent. Everything is interconnected and interdependent. So what is everything? And if awakening in principle is the return to oneness with everything, then don't we need to really be aware of the everything as our lived experience? So the 4 sacred pillars provides us with a map to be able to embrace the everything. Everything is interconnected. This is a model that my ancestors have lived with for tens of thousands of years. This model was the basis upon which our people were able to live sustainably for tens of thousands of years. And only a bit more than 200 years ago, with the incoming of colonialism, our culture underwent a very rapid passage of dispossession, as have other Indigenous cultures around the world. In fact, well, basically every Indigenous culture has been dispossessed around the world. So if we look at this fundamental historical fact, this is not philosophy. This is empirical. These laws are empirical. They are based on lived truths, lived experience of tens of thousands of years. So this map, this model, guides us in a way that we can really, truly take into account the everything, that we can understand our relationship as this seemingly separate individual, our relationship in accord to everything. And it's a bit like well, if we think about our experience of this very siloed approach, that we're focused on the me, the self, the individual me, which is, we know it's not the truth, right? Do we all agree that is not the truth? I'm not a separate me. Again, let's have hands. I'm not a separate me, right? So nonetheless, we've been a lot of people approaching it on the me, the self. And if we look at that in relation to the whole, it's a bit like we're trying to teeter on one leg. So my elders would speak of it as this very solid framework on which we seat ourselves. And we have to have that solid framework to be strong, to be powerful, to not fall over, to not fail. That foundation, the jalkari, is like the seat of ourself in creation, the seat of the cosmos. And so that seat has 4 legs. This is the 4 sacred pillars of life. The first leg is nature, creation. We didn't just land here. We emerge from earth, from nature. We're born of nature. Again, that's not just, you know, some fancy little story. If you really look into it, that is the truth. So that's the first pillar, the first leg. The second being every other living creature, the relationship between all living things. And for our people, it's, you know, rocks are still living things too. They're not classified as unconscious or inert. And then the third pillar is the soul, or the unique embodiment, that each one is uniquely expressed, but is born of the same spirit, the same essence. And then the fourth pillar being the cosmos and the creation laws. Now, if we knock over one of these pillars, what happens to your seat? What happens to your sense of foundation? It's wobbling a bit. It's not quite so stable. You knock over another one of these pillars, and it's really unstable. It's really starting to wobble and tilt. It's very imbalanced. You knock over 3, you disconnect from 3 of these pillars, and you're teetering on one leg, and you're very likely to fall over. You knock over the last one and you've collapsed. So if we look at ourselves and our current world, the systems that we're living within, and the mindset we've adopted as modern humanity, we'll see that we've violated and destroyed pillar 1 and disconnected and dissociated from pillar 1, being nature and earth. And I'm saying at large, okay, so it's a bit of a generalization. we have abused and violated our fellow kin. We do not even see our fellow creatures as brothers and sisters and family. We see others, other people, as separate and unimportant and irrelevant. And then, well, pillar 3 was knocked over in that we've externalized ourselves for many, well, lifetimes by assuming that the divinity or the power is outside of ourselves, or externalized ourselves in terms of who we think we are or what we think we should be. We've adopted externalized beliefs and ideas, so we're not even seated in ourselves anymore. And the 4th pillar has been desecrated by ignoring the natural laws of creation and assuming that by dissecting those laws that we can somehow arrive at truth. And so it's no wonder we're living in a time of great fragility and crisis. This is why we are in crises, because we have knocked over 4 pillars. We have destroyed the foundation of our lived experience on earth. Our lived experience as the manifestation of divinity, of this great field of consciousness that my ancestors called the dreaming, not because it is somehow unreal or in another time and place, but because it is the power of creation emerging here, past, present, and future. That we are a part of it, it is emerging through us. And so, whilst that can sound perhaps overwhelming to acknowledge that we have knocked over 4 pillars, that our jalkari, our foundations, have been desecrated, I want to remind you that the first point of change comes from acknowledgement. That we actually can't transform unless we first acknowledge where we have been unconscious or where we have taken a wrong turn. And that secondly, there's enormous hope, because these pillars are still all here. They're all around us. It's not that they've been lost altogether or completely broken. It's that our connection and our relationship with them has been buried, smothered under a great amount of confusion and the conditions that we're living in that cause us to believe in the separation and the disconnection. But even if you live in an apartment building, the truth is you are still connected with nature. Even if we live in New York City, in the middle of a concrete jungle, we are still connected with nature. The earth is beneath us. The sky is above us. There are insects that still fly past us, birds on wing, trees in the park. Nature is still around us. Other living creatures are still amongst us. Our soul is speaking to us in every single moment, calling us home. And our soul is not separate from Earth's soul. And in fact, as I alluded to before, if we flip this on its head, instead of thinking, oh, I have to be so focused on this inward source of the true self, or somehow pray and you know, silence my mind, etc., and you know, somehow leap beyond my mind and my thoughts. If we flip all of that on its head and we go back to pillar one, nature, earth, and we go and we sit on a rock, we sit in the forest, we sit with the ocean, by a river, our whole physiology is adjusted. And this is proven, that, you know, that this scientific research done on this now. It's called green space, blue space. It's been proven that when we immerse ourselves in the natural world, our brain reorders itself. Our physiology goes through a healing, recalibrating process. And then we don't have to try to silence our mind. We don't have to try to be connected. The connection comes. Now, I do want to acknowledge too, I know some of you would say, oh yeah, well, that's all well and fine, but I'm so unfamiliar with nature, or I'm terrified of nature. Especially if you want to visit Australia. Oh God, why you want to visit Australia? Australia's got every dangerous creature in the world. You know, some people are terrified of nature. And if we start small and simple, we can find a safe space still with nature to restore that connection. So by flipping it on its head, as I say, and reestablishing our connection with nature, we unveil so much more. We tap into so much more than we can ever realize. And that's how our ancestors were able to live sustainably. Because nature is this macro expression of consciousness. It is the living display of interconnectivity, that everything is interconnected and interdependent. Everything is in living relationship with everything. If you sit in a forest for long enough, you'll really see it. Everything is connected to everything. It's all living interwoven networks, and we're all a part of this. So rather than approaching it from a more abstract realm, we plug right back into the living manifest expression of oneness and connectivity.